Dr. Mustafa, could you first speak, please, about Muslim-Christian relationships in Palestine, the way you personally experienced them?
The way I experience our relationship as Palestinians, both Christians and Muslims, first of all, my own experience. My mother breastfed the child of our neighbors, and her name is Lamis, and she's Christian. And you know that in Islamic law, we are literally brother and sister. And this is something beautiful, to be raised with such a story. Of course, I don't remember those days. We were babies. But the story in itself does pave the way for a healthy, beautiful relationship between the two communities. And this basically helped me also to continue interfaith dialogue. And we had never any problems with schooling. I studied at St. George College. And I jokingly, but factually, I jokingly say I began with the Anglicans, but I ended up with the Jesuits. But I'm a Muslim. We share meals. During Ramadan, we get invited, even by Christian clergy, to break fast together. The Sabil Liberation Center often basically held these dinners or iftars, really, to break fast together, and we continue to visit each other in our places. Even sometimes we receive Christian clergy from all denominations at Al-Aqsa Mosque who come usually in solidarity, and at times there are official visits. The social fabric reflects this relationship between Christians and Muslims, and sometimes certain things do take place in the society. No society is really has a rosy picture, but in general it's a beautiful relationship. And if you look around, just think of Iraq, unfortunately, or Syria, you would know that two places, Jordan and Palestine, are unique in terms of the relationship between Christians and Muslims.
That is true, and I certainly always like to tell the story of my landlord when I was in university, who told me that as a child he was baptized. He's a Muslim. But because of the friendship between his father and the neighbor who was the Orthodox priest. But do you see these things still happening, or do you see things changing now with the younger generation in terms of the relationship between?
I would say two major things happened within the last couple of decades. Women started working outside the house, and when women went to teach, when the women went to office, they do have very little time even for their own families. So even the original extended family relationship, shrunk. So it's not only Muslim-Christian, but even Muslim-Muslim, I would say also Christian-Christian. It's the same thing. People are busy, they have tight schedule, they are always on the run. So the fast pace of life is catching up with us. The second thing is basically this technological, should I call it revolution, or people are in the virtual reality. People are connected with friends on the iPhone or basically on laptops and what have you. And this left very little time for real, precious, genuine social relationship. I think these two things contribute to less, I would say, a relationship with the community the way it used to be. And this is, as I said, it's a development, and I would say it's universal.
So let's talk about what our region is going through. And in the last few years, we witnessed a lot of violence in our region in the name of Islam, Muslim violence, and sometimes Christians and other minorities were attacked. And of course, it is impossible to generalize and put everything in one box. Yet at the same time, many are wondering, is Islam a religion of violence or a religion of peace? And that question is we hear it all the time. And so as a Muslim scholar and leader, what is your take on this?
No, of course, when we talk about Islam as peace, we talk about basically the religion that God sent to humanity. It's the same religion. Even from an Islamic perspective, Islam never claimed to be a totally novel religion. Simply, it's the very last phase of revelation. And we believe in all the prophets, and we believe basically in all the books that were revealed by God to humanity. And beautifully it is represented even in mosque. I was at a mosque in Ankara in Turkey, and I saw on 4 corners, on one corner it was written the At-Tawrah in beautiful Arabic calligraphy. The second one Az-Zabur, will liberally translate as Psalms, and the third one Al-Injil, the Gospel in the singular, and Al-Quran, the 4th corner. It shows basically, it reflects this kind of belief. When we talk about peace, of course, we talk about God entrusted humanity. God gave us free will, but He wants us to, two things: not to shed blood and not to cause mischief. And this is the very first story in the Quran, and that's exactly what God wants Adam and, of course, his children to be. Unfortunately, in different societies at different stages in life, they do, go the wrong way. For the region, we have to say that the invasion of Iraq led to the collapse of the state. Before the even during the Ba'ath time, the Ba'athist, pan-Arabist government in Iraq, there were no tension between the Christians and the Muslims the way we see it, or basically between the Shiites and the Sunnites. And later on, the vacuum that there was no Al-Qaeda, of course, and today it's not Al-Qaeda, it's ISIS, and there's plenty of violence and bloodshed. The message of Islam is a message of peace, but we need to look at the context, and the context is basically we need these governments to be democratic, to respect basically the human rights, so that there will be no vacuum. Iraq invaded Kuwait, and that should not have taken place. But at the same time, the invasion of Iraq also led to a power vacuum, and what we see is that result. Muslim scholars responded to theologically. There's a website called Letter to Baghdadi, and basically it's an initiative by His Royal Highness Prince Ghazi bin Muhammad, and many Muslim scholars contributed, and they signed up their names in a letter that basically addressed the theological claims of al-Baghdad. So we do continue responding, but at the same time there are certain realities that they have nothing to do with religion per se.
So Dr. Mustafa, you're saying that to understand the so-called Islamic State, we need to look more at the context. But some would say, what about verses in the Quran that call for fighting non-Muslims, even to fight and kill? How would you interpret these verses and such initiatives that you mentioned? Does it have a different reading of these Quranic verses?
It's very much like when I look at the Old Testament and I look at the story of Joshua and the destruction and the genocide that took place in Jericho. I find this problematic. So we need to look at the other verses and the context in which basically Islam was revealed and of course lived. The Quranic context, of course, we need to bring to the picture the verses that, for example, when God says to the Prophet, and if they are inclined towards peace, you should be inclined towards peace. So that basically is a very solid statement. The relationship with the Christians and the Jews, the people of the book, in a peaceful context, the Quran is basically requiring us to reach the relationship of birr. And you know very well when we speak Arabic, when we say birr, it's birr al-walidain. It's basically a beautiful relationship with parents, and this is extended in the Quran to the people of the book. The Quran says that we can share a meal. The Quran says وَطَعَامُ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ حِلٌّ لَكُمْ. The Quran, and even our food, your food is lawful for us, our food is lawful for you. If we share a meal, then definitely the Quran is not saying that the relationship is based on killing, God forbids. Now for that particular verse, the Muslims were persecuted, and I can tell you that the history of revelation, no prophet was ever accepted with open arms. All of them were persecuted. The nascent Muslim community was persecuted, and you talk about 13 years of Mecca. They were suffering. It was a pacifist relationship. They were being killed, and the Prophet himself would be right there looking at his own followers being killed, and he would tell them, have patience, you are destined basically for heaven. And he could do nothing about it. And there were 3 years of total boycott by the Meccans, because in the verse it does not say non-Muslims, it says the idolaters. Okay, and that's very specific. Now there were 2 waves of migration to Abyssinia, because the Prophet said there is a just king, the Negus in Abyssinia, Habasha, in Ethiopia today. And ultimately they migrated to Medina, whereby in 622 the Prophet himself, peace upon him, migrated to Medina. The Meccans did not leave him alone. They did not leave the nascent community alone, and they followed them all the way to Medina in order to annihilate this community. It's then that you have the Quran saying to the Prophet, defend yourself. So the context of that is very clear.
So these verses, you're saying, in other words, related to a certain context.
Yes.
And should not be applied anytime, anywhere.
Muslims, basically, there was a conference about Islam and peace in the Gulf, in the United Arab Emirates, and a prominent Muslim scholar, Abdullah bin Biyya, said that from his perspective, what he described as jihad al-talab, the notion of jihad, aggressive, preemptive, whatever, he said it is prohibited in Islam. It's a very clear statement by a very, very prominent scholar. And there were many other scholars in the audience, and no one objected to him.
And so, are there growing voices within Islam? Because it seems to many that the only voice we hear is the voice of extremists. Maybe we're not listening carefully.
Unfortunately, the media is very selective. It's a problem also with the choice of CNN, the choice of Fox, which is not really a very good source of information. Unfortunately, the major media channels, they don't look at because when things are peaceful, for the media, that's not iconic. It does not sell. Who would cover? CNN would never come and cover, for example, dialogue here in Palestine between Christians and Muslims. They will never cover our dinners, together as Christians and Muslims. So this is really the problem. The problem is with the choice of the media. There are many, many voices. They outnumber the extremist voices. But there are two problems. One of them is that the media is not there to cover the peaceful context and peaceful discussions and dialogue. And also the problem with the media is also when they show something for a few seconds. I remember on CNN a very short clip to explain the history of Islam in basically with sound bites, and now with the background showing only arms, people, young men and carrying arms, where basically he was trying to explain the difference between Sunnites and Shiites. Where just imagine trying to explain the difference between Protestants and Catholics or Protestants and Christian Orthodox. That basically they will show up militaries and has nothing to do with that. The CNN should have addressed the original split in the Muslim community into Sunnites and Shiite after the death of the Prophet, and that this is really about Ali bin Abi Talib, whether he should be or should not be the head of state. But imagine the background being full with arms, what this does to the viewers.
Image and perception of...
Yes.
So what is then your message to those who insist or who claim that the so-called Islamic state is the actual representation of Islam? What would you say to those people who insist on that?
I would say that in the United States, Pew does surveys all the time, and practically all the Americans who had positive image of Islam, who have direct relationship with Muslims, they do have social relationship, colleagues, at work or the university or friends or what have you. So once you have that interaction, once basically you share a meal, you would know the person intimately, and you would know that the average Muslim is like the average Christian. She never touched a gun, will never touch a gun, will never think of harming the other. It's just like exactly think of yourself and your own community, and you'll see that you will find someone who is sick in his mind, and you'll find that the overwhelming majority are peace-loving people.
Okay, so let us speak a little bit about the situation here in Palestine, the Israeli occupation of our land. Is this conflict mainly a political one or a religious one? How is your reading of the conflict? And the reason I'm asking, because some would look at liberating Palestine here as an Islamic cause, more than something about justice and human rights. Do you see this as a jihad to liberate Palestine?
I look basically at the context and I break it down. Let's, for example, look at it this way. Do we have freedom of movement?
No.
There's no freedom of movement. Do we have access to our holy places in Jerusalem, both Christians and Muslims? We don't, unfortunately. Do we have, are our lands safe from confiscation? No. Are our homes safe, from demolition? No. Are our youngsters and elderly safe, from the Israeli military?
All the
No.
settlers.
Are our olive trees safe from the settlers? Every year during the season to harvest these olive trees, you have the settlers either preventing or even sometimes stealing. After the Palestinian farmers collect the, harvest the olives, they come and they just simply steal the olives. So I look at this. There is no color for this. There is no other name for this except that this is unjust. It should not be the case. The occupation dehumanizes both occupier and occupied. This is a very serious issue. Ending the occupation is basically rehumanizing both occupier and occupied. And for us as Palestinians, we will never be fully human. It's not basically that we are not Homo sapiens or anything else, but basically reclaiming and gaining and getting back our basic even human rights. Unless we get them and we are fully human, the occupier will not be fully human.
So you're saying that there are real problems on the ground, yet some would still argue that the problem is that Palestinians are taught to hate the Jews, and that the problem is that it's a religious one between two worldviews, Islam and Judaism. Even recently, I heard an American presidential nominee just a few weeks ago saying that the problem is that Palestinians grow up learning that, and I'm quoting here, the Jews are the worst people. And then he repeated the words of, in his words, a very prominent Israeli leader who said that peace is impossible because, and again quoting, the other side has been trained from the time they're children to hate Jewish people. And I definitely can relate as a pastor, as a Christian. I've listened to this many times, this question, when people would say, if the Palestinians will teach peace or teach their children to accept the Jews, then there will be peace. Have you heard this before, and how do you respond?
I know that basically you have spin doctors on the Israeli side who try basically to shift the blame when they say there are no partners for peace. Even President Mahmoud Abbas, who basically adopted non-violence, who basically said no more armed struggle. This is it. The venue for us is the United Nations, the Quartet. It's a peaceful way, and nevertheless he has been described as a non-partner. It's shifting the blame. Are Israelis willing to withdraw? Are they willing to accept UN resolutions? Are they willing to simply change? It's about time. Dr. Afif Safi, who basically he's a Christian from Jerusalem. He was our ambassador at the Vatican, London, Washington D.C. and Moscow. He simply said the solution is very simple. They took them 6 days to occupy the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. It should take them 6 days to leave. And if they start on Sunday, they would finish by time for Shabbat. So this is really, so why blame the kids? We never, I can tell you, we never talk to our kids, do hate. But when people see, their classmates basically, sometimes through shelling, through whatever aggressive act on the part of the occupation, and they see their family members getting killed, when they see their homes being demolished, when they are prevented from continuing through the checkpoint, when the olives being stolen, when they cannot reach the olive groves, this is really exactly what feeds the anger.
So you're saying we should look at all these speeches that are sometimes quoted in the context of the occupation. In our conference, we have hundreds of Christians gathering in Bethlehem. And one of our goals for this year is to consider the question, how should we respond to religious extremism? Of course, realizing that it exists in all religions. It's not exclusive to one religion. And so how do you think we should respond to this? So rather than us always saying this is how we should respond, how would you advise us? to respond to something like like ISIS, or simply to a Muslim cleric on a Friday prayer on a TV who delivers a sermon that has elements of extremism, whether here in Bethlehem or in Texas, USA? How do you think we should respond?
I can have a solid example. I just returned from the Doha, Qatar, 12th annual interfaith dialogue, where basically Jews, Christians, and Muslims get together. And of course, I put a picture of the whole, of all the participants on my Facebook page, saying specifically, and with a link to an article from, that covered basically the news. Someone basically wrote on my page, he dismissed a Muslim. Yes. He dismissed all interfaith together and what have you. What I did simply, I went back and I wrote an article about interfaith dialogue in the Quran, Hiwar fil Quran. And I specified basically 1, 2, 3, 4, وَلَا تُجَادِلُوا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ إِلَّا بِالَّتِي أَحْسَنُ, that basically when we have dialogue, it should be in the best fashion, the most beautiful language, with utmost respect. And we spoke already about bir. This is something that, so you can always insist on your own beautiful message.
And so in the end, you seem like a very hopeful person. Do you see hope?
I am hopeful, and my hope is in God. My hope is basically in living up to the message of peace that God sent to humanity, and has been repeatedly sent to humanity. But we need also to be just. We need to share. We need to stop any call for building walls between us and the other being Muslim or Christian or Jew, the other being Mexicans. The idea of building a wall between the United States and Mexico is absurd. It's ridiculous. Let's bring down every wall. Let's bring the wall that exists here in the Holy Land, because it's about preventing it's a very small, tiny place. And we have such a wall in this beautiful Holy Land. It does disrupt. You
do believe that with the end of the occupation, Muslims and Jews and Christians can really coexist in this land?
They did coexist in this land for a long time. As I said, the power structure that exists today, the occupation, they can, live happily thereafter.
Certainly, thank you. And this is our hope and prayer in this conference. Sure. And we thank you for your contribution.
Sure. My pleasure.